Hi again, folks. I'm Awesome Austin, and I probably should have done my hair and, planned a little better for this so some of you take me seriously. But I didn't. This is the real me. Take it or leave it. So, before you click away, please judge me by my content, not my appearance. Okay, now before I get started, I just have to share a little frustration. You know those moments in life when things are going so well and then life just shits on you? Pardon my French. Okay, I mean it tests you. Well, I've had a promise to myself to record these videos in a single take. No cuts, no edits. Well, I've got to admit that this is my second take, but not on purpose. Right, I felt like I was almost done. I was feeling pretty incredible about how it was coming out. When life reached into my soul and nearly crushed my spirit. Okay, some kind of glitch or something, and poof, it's all gone. I was this close to just calling it a day. It's past midnight. It's been a long week. I'm beat from burning the candle at both ends, so to speak. But the more I learn about these concepts, the more passionate I am about sharing. And most importantly to me, opening the discussion, right? I almost just packed up for the night. Maybe I should. I'll pay for this tomorrow, and tomorrow's another long day. But I won't sleep well if I do that either. So if life wants to test my resolve, I'm coming out swinging. I ain't giving up that easy. Now, I believe it was Napoleon Hill who said, "The closer you are to the door of destiny, the more fiercely the winds will blow." Ha 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 ha. And let me tell you, it's been quite the storm. So, let's see, speaking of Napoleon Hill, he was one of Dave Ramsey's main influencers when he was writing, I think it was his first book, Baby Steps. And Dave Ramsey is part of today's topic as I challenge one of his core teachings by the term, invest the difference. Now, to be honest, I'm still a little irritated to be starting this again rather than wrapping it up. But at least, I'm alive, I'm able and capable to do it all again. So, maybe a joke will get me back on track. Do you want to know why the insurance agent became a comedian? To ensure a good time. Ha 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 ha. Now, what am I doing here? Right? Okay, so I am celebrating Financial Literacy Month by discussing financial awareness topics for the entire month of April. Call me a nerd if you want, but these concepts have been keeping me up at night. Today, not only am I challenging a 50-year-old paradigm, but also one of the key investment principles of Dave Ramsey and Suze Orman. So I probably should have dressed up a little or done my hair at least. But hey, here's the real me. Here we go. This is video 5. Video 5 in the series. I encourage you to check out all of my videos in this sequence, of course. But for sure, if you have not done so already, you may want to visit my term life debate title, as today is a direct continuation from that. Now, this by the term, invest the difference. After 5 decades, right, over 50 years, this is still going strong in financial planning. So, is it really all it's cracked up to be? I mean, I'm not so convinced anymore. Let's jump in. So, last time we started discussing the BTID, right? The buy the term, creed, invest the difference creed. This was coined by Art Williams Jr. His company was A.L. Williams and Associates, founded in, I believe it was 1977. And this eventually became Primerica, which is a company that still exists today. Primerica went public on the New York Stock Exchange in, I think, 16 years ago in 2010. And it maintains an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau. All right, that's just about the highest rating you can get as an insurance company. So that's pretty high marks. Now, I had a little difficulty finding recent figures, but as of 2024, so 2 years ago, they were the third top issuer of term life insurance coverage in North America. And as I'll get into later, term insurance does have its benefits. Okay, so I'm not completely disregarding by the term, But before I get into that, my email is in the description. Feel free to contact me or get in touch with your insurance professional if you want to find out what a term policy can protect for you and your family, or to find out more about converting your current term into lifelong coverage. Now, with that out of the way, let's really dive in. Last time I promised to cover more about Art's mission, right? He made it his mission to promote buy the term, invest the difference, as he coined that slogan. Now, why I think it potentially made more sense in the late 70s, early 80s, and then, of course, why I feel this way. So, in 1977, Art launched his firm with the sole mission to convince families to replace whole life or cash value policies, as it's often referred to, by exchanging them into term insurance and then investing the difference, aka the amount of savings from their premiums, their monthly payments or yearly payments, whatever, into mutual funds. Now, if you don't know why Art Williams felt so strongly about this, you've got to go to my previous video, and I'll see about linking that in the description, or who knows, maybe I'll put it up here somewhere if I can figure out how that works. But he made it his mission after his father's death. He felt kind of like his father paid too much for too little coverage. So he came up with buy the term, invest the difference strategy. And this exploded in the late 70s, early 80s. And of course that was in part because of, Art's huge advertising push. But also because interest rates were extremely high in these eras. Sometimes they exceeded 15%. Now, this definitely made the low internal rates of return in traditional whole life policies look particularly unattractive to the public. By 1980, the Volcker shock, that's Volcker, the Volcker shock, aggressively raised interest rates to battle that high inflation. And with the effective Fed funds rates hitting over 17%. Now, this looked incredibly appealing, appearing that the money market funds provided a really high income, right? A big return on your investment. And we'll get into some more of the realities of that realized gains later on. But the actualized real return in this case, was much lower due to the extreme inflation, which we've been dealing with lately as well, huh? Now, for example, back then a 17% yield when compared with a 15% inflation rate, right? Do the math. That leaves you a 2% real gain in purchasing power. And we haven't even adjusted yet for taxes on those gains at the time of withdrawal. Those taxes are going to be a big difference in your investment. So plan accordingly, and we'll get more into that later too. For now, okay, in the same era, back in the late 70s, early 80s, the average rate of return on the cash value component of a whole life policy was generally in the range of 4 to 8%, though in the early 80s, some companies saw dividend interest rates rise to over 10% returns. So while the guaranteed rate at the time for returns on a whole life policy was typically kind of low around that, right? So it was around 4%. And high market interest rates during the 80s drove up the total return through the company dividends. So though 4% was the guaranteed rate, interest earned on these reinvested dividends were also generally taxable. And when compared to this, when we compare this to the indexed universal life policies, or the IULs created in the 90s, these IULs are much more tax advantaged than the whole life policies from the previous decade. And on those 4% returns, they often saw 10% or higher, right? So it worked out pretty well, but it didn't look that good on paper in the beginning. Now, some key details on the performance of these whole life cash value life policies. They saw interest rates spike, from 1980 to 82 to fight inflation. So insurance companies began passing higher earnings to policyholders, and this is where those dividend interest rates increased, from maybe 7 to 8% in the late 70s to over 10 or 12% by the mid 80s. So how did the guaranteed versus actual dividends compare? Well, many policies, that only guaranteed that growth rate of 4% or less, the actual participating returns, including dividends, did often fall in the 5 to 7% range. And a few companies were definitely higher than that. Now, in one policy performance example for Mass Mutual, as cited from uscourts.gov, it demonstrates a significant rise in dividend and interest rates, which reflected the inflationary environment of the era. Okay. And this showed rates rising from 7% in I think it was 1978 to over 11% by the mid-1980s. Now, let's jump forward 30 years based on historical data for U.S. large cap equity mutual funds as approximated by the S&P 500 total returns. Both the 2010s and 2020s, at least through early this year, early 2026, they've delivered above average nominal returns. Though, of course, we've been dealing with that high inflation as well, especially, in the 2020s here. So that significantly narrowed the gap between nominal ROI, the return on investment, and real or actual returns, what you actually put in your pocket. So what's the approximate average annual returns for mutual funds? Well, for the 2010s, so from 2010 to 2019, we saw almost 14% nominal returns on investment, with those, the nominal returns being closer to 11% real return when adjusted for inflation. from 2020 through early 2026, it was somewhere around 13 to 15% nominal ROI. Excuse me. And again, that, once we adjust for that 10, inflation, it's 10 to 11% on real returns. And that, don't get me wrong, 10 to 11% is pretty good. But by the time you take taxes out, not to mention other fees, what other fees are in there? Let's dive into that in a little bit, okay? So there's no arguing that the 2010s were a decade of growth, right? They were characterized by that long bull market following the 2008 financial crisis. And let's see, so there were exceptionally high returns for the S&P 500, right? Especially in years, 2013 and 19? They were both pushing upwards of 30%. Those are incredible years, and they're not really that rare, right, on a 5 or 10 year timeline. Now the 2020s have seen even higher nominal returns than the 2010s and significantly higher inflation, right? That kind of comes back to that real pocket value. So now, 2021 and 2023 were the outliers so far in the last 6 years, right? Returning over 20% each year on those 2 years. Now, the surge in inflation, of course, has really eaten into these gains, but it would do that no matter what you're invested in, right? So we can kind of bring that out as a wash. But that real purchasing power of these gains really comes down closer to probably an estimated, right, 10 to 11% per year. And again, that's pretty good. We'll take that. Throw your money in a pot, let it grow. That's pretty nice, significant. Let's take that 10 to 11%. But, let's not forget the down years. Notably, 2022? It fell 23%. And over 19% down during both 2011 and 2018. Okay, and we're just talking about the 2010s. We're not even going back to the 2008 financial crisis, okay, which saw losses of almost 40%. Can you imagine? 40%. Now, if you're withdrawing your money in retirement when it's down 40%, what does that do to the longevity of your portfolio? And so, of course, if you're not withdrawing in that time, you leave it in there, don't touch it, then, you've got just about that same zero as your hero, frame as in an index universal life policy where they're talking about you never, on a negative year, your account freezes, you see zero loss. If you don't withdraw your money in that time frame, you see zero loss as well. Okay, so when it really hurts is when you're seeing that in retirement years. So due to these variables, and notably the timing of the investments or withdrawals, the average investor often earns less than the fund's published return. So, of course, the past performance is not indicative of future results, up or down. And the market is a volatile place, okay? And the benefits rely heavily on when your money goes in and when it comes out. So during your retirement years, when you're living off that income, that takes a big hit. When you got to withdraw your money, when it's down 20%, 40%. All right. So anyways, I wasn't really planning on getting into the specifics, getting so specific into these market cycles. All right. So hopefully I didn't lose you in all this technical jargon. Let me try to tie this all together with a little less nomenclature. So where was I before I derailed into this clutter of percentages and interest rates and inflation and dividends, right? Okay, so let's see. Back to buy the term, invest the difference. BTID. Where do I go from here? I've really got so many pros and cons rattling around up here that it's hard to keep it all on a clear and concise path, okay? So stay with me here. We'll get back to the point. And before I get off track on the for and against arguments about Art's father's cash value life insurance and the strengths and weaknesses of investing the difference, right? Do you invest directly into the market? What do you do with that difference? Do you invest it in a whole life policy? Well, before I get into all that, I'll review some of the analytics of term policies, right? Because we're talking buy the term, invest the difference. So term life insurance premiums generally increase 4 to 9% for every year you age. I don't know about you. I don't know about the rest of you, right? But it seems to me that every year I look back and find myself another year older, right? Now, let me go out on a limb here and assume that that's true for you as well. So, why the increase? Well, it doesn't take a big stretch of logic to deduce. It's driven by higher mortality risk and declining health as we get older, right? So while standard term policies lock in a level rate for the length of the term, the premium costs rise significantly if you buy later in life. So a 50-year-old will likely pay at least 4 times more than a 20-year-old for that same coverage. Now, what else affects this, okay? On top of aging, your health status also becomes a more significant factor. New or worsening pre-existing conditions, for example, let's say diabetes and heart disease and so on, right? These will significantly increase rates. Now, if you're a tobacco user, you will most likely pay 2 to 3 times more than a non-smoker. That's pretty significant. But so is your risk of death. Okay, so a 50-year-old pays 4 times more than a 20-year-old. That's a 400% increase based on age alone and hasn't even factored in your health status. Every time your 10 or 20-year term expires, right, renewing it will be significantly more expensive based on your attained age and health at that time. So, let's recap, okay? Using Art's method, or perhaps in this day and age, I should call it the Dave Ramsey method or the Suze Orman method, right? They're the ones really touting this today, okay? Making it, they're out there really discussing that. So, your rising cost of insurance will substantially diminish all those investment returns if you got to buy term insurance that's going up every year, let alone for sure every time you renew. So, while Art, Dave, and Suze so firmly insist that you buy the term, invest the difference, none of them, right? I mean, I don't know everything I haven't listened to everything. I haven't read a lot, only a couple of Dave's books, but none of them that I've seen or heard discuss that becomes the most costly way to insure yourself over the time span of your entire life when talking about term life, right? So those are some very increasing rates. And they are very quick to talk about the increasing rates in the cash value or whole life policies or the index universal life policies, right? These things that can be max funded for cash value. They are very quick to discuss the rising cost of insurance. Put that in quotes there because I don't know if it really applies to a whole life policy, right? Yes, you have a rising cost of insurance, but it's factored in for the course of your whole life. And we'll get into that later. Right now we're talking term insurance, okay? So as they say to invest, buy the term, invest the difference, none of them discuss the consequences or the cost of renewing that term policy, that policy every time that term expires. So of course, they're so quick to tout the rising cost of insurance when it comes to investing in whole life and indexed universal life IUL policies. But that's kind of misleading because these permanent policies are generally structured to account for that rising cost of insurance so you can pay the same premium for life. And they are correct to tell you that you will pay more in the beginning years of the coverage, right? But this is offset by time and becomes arguably the most efficient way to afford permanent protection. Dave Ramsey is quick to call you a fool for considering an IUL. Of course, maybe not in those words, but pretty darn close. Or a whole life policy, while adamantly warning you of the rising cost of insurance or cost, in these cash value policies. But in all of what I've read or heard on Dave's shows and podcasts, right, I've never heard a concern about how much higher those costs actually rise with his term life strategy. So we've talked about the costs, but now let's review more about the long-term consequences of term policies. So remember in my previous video when I called term insurance a gamble? And the company is basically betting that you will outlive your coverage. It's a pretty safe bet, okay? Statistically speaking, when you're young and in good health, that's a pretty safe bet. Insurance companies are experts, right? It's what they do. They are experts at mitigating their risk. And I'd wager that these carriers love term policies, okay? Especially to the young and the healthy. I mean, that's almost like free money in their pockets, right? I'd liken this to the house edge in Vegas, okay, right? Sure, the casino will occasionally pay out a jackpot here and a jackpot there, and here a jackpot, there a jackpot, not everywhere a jackpot. So statistically speaking, the odds of the casino coming out on top, I mean, they've got to be near 100%. Okay? just like the odds of outliving a term policy. So most insurers, they're going to stop selling those new term life policies between the ages of 65 to 80. For carriers that do, your benefit options become dramatically limited. Premiums increase drastically, and the maximum coverage lengths decrease. Okay? In fact, coverage typically becomes prohibitively expensive. Crazy expensive. So, if by this age you do already own a term policy, they may let you renew it annually up to age 95. Though, again, by this point, your premiums are through the roof, right? They are so high. So high, you're likely better off stashing that cash in a coffee can than investing in a term policy. Okay? So buy the term, invest the difference. It's really only helpful if you want, if you have no interest in a whole life policy. Okay? Now, how about, let's see, a quick word from our sponsor. Okay? Get my sales cap on. On the rare chance that you're in this age bracket or know someone who is, that's the, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you know someone in that age bracket that doesn't already have coverage in place, not all hope is lost. And you are not alone. My info's in the description. Email me today for a free review of final expense options for every budget. I find it a little surprising how many seniors don't have a plan in place yet. Whether it's insurance, some savings set aside. I don't mean to sound insensitive, okay? But if I may be direct, don't let your loved ones carry the financial weight of your final expenses. So if you haven't built your belief in me yet, please contact your trusted professional before it's too late. All right. Take that hat off now. Enough of that. I'm not trying to wear my salesman hat right now. Not right at the moment. So, back to our regularly scheduled program. All right, back to the debate. And real quick, speaking of debate, okay, I really, truly do want to debate these ideas. I'm not here just to talk, just to hear myself talk, right? I genuinely want feedback. I know I'm challenging some strict dogmas here. Buy the term, invest the difference, right? It's a 50-year-old concept. And is this actually the best advice? Or is it just familiar because it's what we grew up with? There is no expansion of knowledge without examining opposing perspectives. Okay? I grew up with the buy the term, invest the difference. And I've been reframing my beliefs on how to build a structurally sound financial house. So if you disagree with my beliefs, I don't want to hear from you. I need to hear from you. I need to hear from you if you disagree with me. So, what's my intent? I intend to be a lighthouse that steers people safely in the right direction. Not a fog that's creating chaos and confusion, right? Blinding people to the hidden dangers that are invisible until it's too late. If that's what you think I'm doing, call me out in the comments, right? For all the world to see. Heck, you can even call me in person. 618-553-7789. That's how serious I am. If you can prove me wrong on this, okay, I will publicly apologize. I will hang my hat and even refund all my clients. Even though clients don't actually pay for my services, right? Insurance companies pay me for bringing them clients. So you as a client, you pay the exact same whether you go through your broker, your agent, or whether you go directly to the company. But that's a topic for another time, okay? Anyway, if I'm completely wrong here, I'll go sell car insurance instead. I'll hang my life insurance hat. So, help me know the long-term ramifications. Okay, the last thing I want is to give advice that will cause an early collapse of what's intended to be a lifelong financial house, right? And not just lifelong for me. I want to build one that lasts for generations. Okay, I want generational wealth, and I want that for you. And there I go again. Right, I digress. From rant to ramble and chatter to babble, right? It must be getting late. It's after midnight. In fact, yeah, it's definitely after midnight. So it's hard to stay focused, especially when I have so much to say. Now, time to switch back to the track and drive this train before I'm the locomotive who crashed because I had no brakes. And speaking of brakes, maybe it's time to call it a day before my Dr. Seuss rhymes get more carried away and all this work turns into play. Okay, to keep this professional, I should probably edit that out. But hey, that's just me. Think what you want. I told myself no cuts, no edits, no second takes. So forget all that. Let's just land this plane and get right back into the topic of the day. So, all right, for term policies, I spoke in length about their disadvantages, okay? But I do have some more good things to say. There are more households with permanent policies than temporary or term policies, right? But term policies do have their place, okay? Outside of being so popularized by the Ramseys and Orman crowds, if we look beyond just saving on the cost of premiums so you have more money to invest in the markets, as we've discussed, term is generally considered the most affordable means of coverage. When you're young, this can be a great option for people wanting coverage for specific needs for a limited time. So let's say you're a young family who just bought your first home. Okay, term insurance can protect your family from this temporary debt. So if something were to happen to the main income provider, right, mainly an accidental death or disability, then there could be a safety net from that death to provide the surviving spouse with income replacement, or, if you're setting it up right, even enough to pay off the remaining mortgage altogether. So, mortgage protection or other high debt asset coverage are the most popular reasons for term insurance. There's a few others that make a lot of sense, but we're not going to get into those now. So, in my opinion, where it truly makes the most sense, are these temporary coverage for the life, this temporary coverage for the life of the mortgage, at the end of which there's no coverage needed once the house is fully paid, right? So that's where temporary coverage can make a lot of sense in your financial house. Now, most often, the death benefit, in the case of mortgage protection, it's going to decrease throughout the term policy as, every year you're paying on that mortgage. So the mortgage gets smaller until eventually, the covered debt becomes zero and non-existent, and there's no longer an insurable interest, right? Because there is no debt. So this decreasing death benefit is another reason that the term is so cost effective, especially in this case, compared to a whole life policy. And this type of term is often used simultaneously with permanent insurance. Okay, so this allows for typically a much cheaper way to protect your loved ones from complete financial ruin, offering priceless peace of mind for a much smaller price through a term, though a term on its own, as we've discussed, is likely not the best option, especially for those seeking or looking for lifelong assurance. Many can be converted into a permanent policy later with no medical exam or proof of insurability. Okay, so, but as we discussed, you will pay more upon renewal based on your age at that time. So the initial savings can be much more costly down the road if you convert later. Okay? Now, in my opinion, this is pretty much where the benefits of term insurance end. Okay? There's way more that I could say, and maybe I should. But I feel like I'd better keep moving or risk never wrapping this up. Okay? Now, beyond these main examples, you have seen that the savings on cost may not outweigh the benefits, not in the long run. Okay? By this point, Art, Dave, and Suze, they would have had you paying into term policies for nothing, right? Assuming, big assumption here, assuming that you've outlived the term. But let's face it, most of you will. So, is that really the best way? Do you really want to plan your life one term at a time? Or do you want to plan for a long and healthy life? In my humble opinion, after you outlive that term, you practically threw that money away, right? So you might as well have been investing that term money into a permanent policy where it can build cash value. It can have growth linked to an index fund, okay? And, will some of those premiums paid, some of those payments through the years be lost in the insurance costs? Yes and no, right? It's not always that simple, okay? And generally speaking, I think it depends on how long you live, okay? Most often, by the time of your passing, you will have received benefits that far exceed your total premiums paid. I'm not kidding. Right? This was not the case for Art Williams's father, Art Sr., okay, who died earlier than expected. Hence, Art Jr.'s heartfelt crusade against whole life cash accumulation policies, okay? But let me reiterate, if Art Sr. had lived longer, I genuinely believe he would have found the full value in his permanent policy, right? Once more, let me ask, are you planning for the next 10 or 20 years? Or are you building your legacy for your entire life? Okay? Do you want to look back at the end of your term and have nothing to show for all that expense? Or do you want to look back and see your money has been working for you? I mean, no one can tell you what to do, but you know my point of view, okay? And this is why I sell insurance, not the other way around. Let me make this clear, okay? I don't try to make you believe in cash value life insurance because I'm an insurance salesman. I am an insurance salesman because I believe in the accumulation of cash value life insurance. So, I don't want you to believe in it because I'm selling it to you. I'm selling it to you because I believe in it. So, I mean, Dave Ramsey will tell you anything but term is a waste of money. And it's easy for him to say that, right? When he's making, an estimated $300 million a year? That's nuts, right? Easy for him to say with that kind of yearly income, okay? Now, did Art's BTID strategy make more sense in the 80s than today? I mean, it definitely might have, especially for his specific circumstance, for dying early, dying before he planned, okay? But let's not forget, insurance is a much different investment today than it was 5 long decades ago, okay? Now, as such, it's debated differently today than it was back then, okay? While historically popular for separating, the BTID was popular for separating insurance from investments, modern studies show and suggest that it is often a myth, as disciplined savings, lower investment returns, and massive tax advantages of permanent policies often make that BTID, that buy term invest the difference, less effective today than a well-structured permanent policy. Now, high interest rates in the 1980s, they allowed for decent conservative returns on invested premiums. Though at first glance, they don't appear to beat the pure investment in the market. The BTID concept did also grow in popularity out of a desire for lower insurance costs via the term policies as compared to high commission, low yield, whole life policies of that era. Now, term insurance did, and arguably still does, offer a simple and straightforward alternative to potentially complex and sometimes seemingly opaque permanent insurance products. Now, some key points to consider as to why BTID is challenged today, right? The strategy relies entirely on the discipline of consistently investing the difference. Now, this is great in theory, though in practice often does not happen. Even when staying steadfast in the control of investing, lower returns are common and rising taxes take a larger bite of the game, okay? A 2015 study that's often cited on this topic found that over a 29-year period, the average investor only managed 2.5% return. Now, even for those who steadily invest diligently in an index, right, like the S&P 500, rather than attempting to cherry pick the winners, they see much of their returns chewed up by taxes at the time of withdrawals. Not to mention, if they're withdrawing in a negative year, that makes a big difference. And when you're living on that income, you don't have much choice on when you're withdrawing it, right? So when taxes are factored in to pure investment gains, IULs and other whole life products will often outperform. Now, the modern insurance options, right? The insurance of these days. This isn't your grandma's life insurance anymore, all right? It's insurance for your grandma, but it's not your grandma's life insurance, okay? The modern insurance options are generally considered superior to those of 30, 40, and 50 years ago. So, indexed universal life, or IULs, offer a more holistic plan. And so do some other, cash value whole life policies. IULs combine term coverage with permanent policies, offering a better downside protection. So you can have that zero is the hero floor when you are in retirement years. That's when it really matters, okay? And in comparison to pure investment only portfolios, that makes a big difference. So let's talk about investment only portfolios, right? The appearance of those higher returns often becomes another myth when accounting for all the fees, taxes, and market risks. Okay? Studies often show that when actually taking these factors into account, the invested difference or complete real return, right, debatably seldom produce a higher guaranteed cash value than a properly structured modern permanent life policy. One big problem with the mainstream acceptance of life insurance investing is the inability of ongoing monetization, right? Sure, an agent or broker gets paid once by the carriers for your policy. Okay, once. But that's a huge difference, night and day compared to an investment manager making 1% or more of your portfolio for the rest of your life. And it doesn't even matter if your portfolio is up or down for the year. They're making their 1% or higher. Okay? So some of the largest companies like Vanguard, Fidelity, BlackRock, and even your small town investment firms, right? They have a lot to lose if you start to see the value in these other avenues. Okay, and that 1% or higher, that's only the management fee. What about the other expense? The other expenses, there's expense ratios, transaction fees, there's even performance fees that can eat up, in some cases, easily 20% or more of your profits. And we still haven't even taxed that yet. Okay, so in summary, the BTID is still popular for wealth building, right? When you're investing the difference. And I'll admit, those years with 20 or 30% gains, they look amazing compared to the upside caps around 10% in an IUL. But that BTID, by the term invest the difference, right, that carries higher risks, much higher risks, carries taxes, management fees, okay? These all lower the probability of the pure investment route. And now, outperforming a well-structured, permanent, and fully tax-advantaged IUL policy? Maybe not. Okay. Now let's also add the money burned or basically wasted from most likely outliving that touted term insurance, right? That Art, Dave, and Susie all still agree is needed. You add that into those taxes, those fees, those, you're really starting to lose its advantage, in my opinion. So when you truly see each of these options in their purest forms, both completely stripped of taxes, fees, cost of insurance, etc., etc., etc. Okay, actual apples to apples, the completely naked, real returns on your initial investment. Okay, the genuine and tangible money put back into your pocket or paid out to your loved ones versus the physical amount originally invested. Okay, when it comes to all things considered, the waters are muddy, to say the least. Okay, it becomes much less cut and dry to claim that one is the best guaranteed option over the other. Okay, so no matter what any guru tells you, especially to claim that this one method is best for everybody, no matter what financial class you fall, I don't know about that. So, the next time someone like Dave Ramsey tells you IULs are a stupid tax, if you've listened to him much, you've heard that, right? Next time he tells you they're a stupid tax, ask him, how much tax do you pay on a traditional investment return? Okay? And when he puffs up his chest, his feathers, and cites high administrative fees in life insurance investments, all right? Ask him how much an investment manager profits on your 401k or your stock portfolios, your retirement account. And when he basically calls you a dense fool in his manner of hubris disdain for even considering high insurance costs of an IUL or any other max-funded whole life product, right, that's intended for cash value, then I encourage you to borrow the phrase from Tish Cook, one of my many great mentors in insurance, okay, and calmly ask him, Dave, high compared to what? So, what's best for you and your tax bracket? I'm probably not yet qualified to answer that. You know what? I'm also humble enough to think I may never be, no matter how much I learn, how many hours I put in. I could do this for the rest of my life and still probably not think that I know what's best for everybody. But I do know that people like Dave, making more every year than most of us in our entire life, may not be qualified to answer that for us either. It becomes hard for me to take tax advice from those in the top percent of wealth, right? Those who pay less tax than everybody else. They make the most money, they pay the least tax. I don't know. It's also hard for me to trust financial advice from these so-called experts who seem so far disconnected in income than us commoners, right? On the other side now, I also have a hard time trusting insurance investments when everybody who tells you about them on social media or YouTube or Google or, all that on Facebook, everything you come across is like the stereotype of a used car salesman of the 1970s and their plaid jackets. And, I don't care how big a truck I'm test driving. I don't believe them when they tell me that it'll pull anything you want it to. Everything has its limits, right? Cash value accumulation life insurance does too. Not to mention, I think it wasn't until like page 20 of Google before it felt like I found genuine discussions and not just people trying to sell me on, yes, it's the best for everyone and their pets, and the only investment you'll ever need, pay off all your debts and this and that, borrow, from yourself, whatever. Or, no, it's the devil's playground and you'll burn in brimstone before you see that pay off. I'm telling you, you had to scroll, search probably page 20 of Google before you got any kind of real info there. So am I saying insurance as a retirement vehicle is the one best thing for everyone's future? No. Am I saying I don't fully agree with this buy the term, invest the difference plan that's been, so hard pushed for the last 50 years? Yes, I am saying that I don't fully agree with that. Now, what I can say is do your own homework. I know that's hard when, all of internet searches is controlled by whoever, whatever, if, the top pages are all the paid ads and whatever else. Okay. So, read some books, talk to your professionals, do your homework. Don't just listen to TikTok. Don't just listen to Facebook. Don't just run a Google search and think, okay, I got it figured out, all right? Now, I can also say that I, for one, do believe in permanent insurance over term insurance. Now, are there times when term insurance is good? Yeah, of course. But I would much rather look back after 20 years of paying term insurance and see my cash value growing. And yeah, it grows slow in the beginning years. This is, beneficial over the course of your lifetime. And over the course of your lifetime, what's the chances you're going to die? 100%. So why not? Invest in that death. I definitely believe in whole life over term insurance for most circumstances. Not all, most. There are times when maybe you want both. And maybe you don't believe in insurance, okay? I get that. If you've never had a loss, you probably have no reason to believe in it. So what's recommended nowadays? I wish I had the study to cite this, but I would encourage you to search out the benefits of 30% of your portfolio invested in IUL, Index Universal Life. 30% also invested in FIA, Fixed Index Annuities. And the remaining 40%, put it in your standard investments, S&P 500. Use that diversification for your portfolio. Okay, and look into it. Don't just take my word for it. Though, maybe next time I'll be able to get cite the reference on that. And I should take a moment to apologize to you for not citing any references because, I expect more from myself, and I hate it when, I'm turned off when I'm watching videos on YouTube and all these people are saying, oh, studies show this, studies show that, but they don't tell you what study or where to find it. Well, I know I was guilty of that today, and I apologize, okay? So I'll try and be better about that moving forward, but in the meantime, don't take my word for it, right? Do your homework, look for yourself. And again, if you think I'm wrong, tell me. I need to know. Now, I'll revisit these strategies down the road, that 30, 30, 40 that I just discussed, but, that's probably all the time I have for today. We're looking at, gosh, it's getting late. Late. It's already tomorrow. All right, now I can hardly wait to discuss more about reasons, reasons even not to buy permanent insurance. Okay, I've been bragging up permanent insurance all this time. Okay, there are some circumstances where you might not want it, and I'll be happy to discuss those too. Because without looking at things from every angle, there is no growth. I'm also looking forward to getting into validating and debunking more insurance myths, right? As well as 401k and Roth IRA stuff. And let's really compare these costs. All right. And so many more topics to come. So if you're still here, I'm actually a bit impressed. I'm impressed that you made it till the end. So thank you. Thank you. I didn't expect this to run so long. And please, let's open this debate. Give me your comments down below, okay? Add in those comments what you like, what you don't like about all of this, okay? So this is Awesome Austin, guys. I'm signing out, and whatever you do, don't forget, the best things in life aren't things.